Hey, welcome to the Unshakable Edge, the podcast for those who refuse to settle. I'm your host, Joe Warren, and if you're ready to master discipline, strengthen your mindset, and gain the edge in every area of your life, this is your home. Each episode delivers powerful insights on resilience, growth, and success, helping you take control of your life, take action, and build an unshakable life. Let's dive into this week's episode and sharpen your edge today. Have you ever felt like your dreams were moving at a snail's pace? Years ago, I started a journey with just 5 people: my wife, my parents, and 2 close friends. We would meet in my parents' basement with nothing just simply other than a passion to reach people and a dream to change thousands of lives. In today's episode, I want to share some key ideas that continue to fuel my passion to reach people and hopefully help you on your journey. I want to talk about why you shouldn't despise small beginnings, how to measure progress in the right way by using the gain rather than the gap, why it's important to embrace your own story rather than compare your story to other people, and last but not least, the power of grit. By taking these key ideas to heart, you'll be prepared for the inevitable moments of discouragement, disappointment, and even delusional thoughts about giving up. These 4 ideas will keep you in the fight. And it is a fight. John Maxwell made it very clear when he said, everything worthwhile in life is an uphill journey. But if you use these ideas that we're going to talk about today and you don't give up, there will be a harvest, there will be a return on your investment, and one day there will be fruit on your tree. When we began this journey 20 years ago, I fully expected explosive growth that very first year, but it never came. Many days I felt like we weren't moving at all. It didn't seem like we were gaining progress, yet over time, we'd add a person here, we'd add a family there, and it was a slow journey. And I spent many times, many days despising those small beginnings. Now, that's not something that I really believe we should do. In fact, we shouldn't despise our small starts. We shouldn't look down on them as insignificant. And sometimes we can even look at them as worthless. It's easy, if you do, to become disillusioned when things don't happen overnight. Think about it for a moment. You ever started something, had a dream, you got started expecting major movement or extreme growth, only for it to go really, really slow? Not much movement at all. Doesn't look like many results are happening. And you can ask yourself, hey, is this even worth continuing on? But as you and I both know, this idea of overnight success really is a myth. Real growth actually happens most often over consistent effort over time. Now, I'd like to take you back in time, back to the good old 80s, if you will. Come with me, and I want to look at a band that got its humble beginnings in 1981. Now is, of course, a band that if I said the name, man, we would know it in America. The world would probably know it. Most of the world would probably know it. But it didn't start that way. It started with a simple ad in a newspaper. In fact, in 1981, Lars Ulrich, a drummer living in LA, placed an ad in the paper along the lines of something like this: drummer looking for metal musicians to jam with. That was it. Now, a guy by the name of James Hetfield responds to that ad, and the two hit it off musically. They shared this love for British heavy metal and the raw energy of underground thrash. Later on that year, they officially formed the group Metallica, but it started with just a small beginning of a couple guys getting together to jam, and then they added other guys, and they began to play music, and they began to do gigs, and they began to write songs, having a slight glimpse of success when their song Hit the Lights was featured on a metal album. But it wasn't until 1983, when they released their debut album, that they started to gain traction in this underground following that I would refer to as metalheads, which I was one, long hair and all, dressed in black. You probably remember those if you lived in the 80s, all those people with long hair, dressed in black, slamming their heads, right? Ah, kind of deal. And they gained a little success then. Now, it wasn't until 1988 that they started to gain more airtime on the radio. MTV starts to pick them up, recognizing who they are with their video for the song One from their album And Justice for All. And so they start to gain some traction there. They're starting to sort of get out there. People are starting to know them somewhat. But it's not really till 1991 with the release of what is simply titled Metallica. Now, others refer to it as the Black Album, with songs like Enter Sandman, The Unforgiven, and of course, Nothing Else Matters. This is where they really become global phenomenons, selling 30 million copies of that album. And what seemed like all of a sudden they come out of nowhere. Most of the world would look at it and go, wow, overnight success. They were not there, and then all of a sudden they are here. Now we know that's not really how it happens. In fact, I was in high school when the Metallica album came out, and the next thing I knew, people that weren't necessarily metalheads were singing songs like Enter Sandman, and I thought, wow, something's happening here. And I don't know for sure, but I would say that James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich probably didn't despise the small beginning. When the two musicians when they came together to jam, to share their love for music, I don't think they were going, oh, this probably won't go anywhere. They weren't looking at the small beginning as insignificant or worthless. I have a feeling that they probably looked at it as this is the start of something good. In fact, that's why they began to add other people and write music and play gigs and do all the things that they did, because I don't think they despised the small beginning. They found the value in the beginning. And if we don't despise the beginning, it will create value in us. It helps us become the people that we need to become to be successful. In all those years, in the 10 years that it took them to come to the place of stardom, it took them doing the small things, not despising the small things, seeing the value, and then they became the musicians, the songwriters, and the people that they needed to be, that when 1991 hit, they were ready to go because they didn't despise the small beginning. Now, that didn't come without difficulty. In fact, they lost, unfortunately, a band member due to a tragic accident. They had to kick out their lead guitar player because of his behavior and replace him with someone else. But it all worked out pretty well when this band got to the place where they became famous and successful, if you will. All, I think, because they didn't despise the small beginning. And so ask yourself a question: where are you? Are you thinking that your small beginning is insignificant? That it's not worth much? That you're thinking about giving up on your dreams because it just doesn't seem like things are really going all that great? There's slow progress, there's not much happening. Can I encourage you to keep going, to keep grinding? Instead of despising and looking at that small beginning as something that's not so great, can you look at your small beginning as a huge success? Because the truth of the matter is, most people don't ever get started. But that's not you. You've started. You've gained progress. Even if it's not as fast as you want it to be, keep going so that you get to where you want to go eventually. Someone said it this way: don't be discouraged by slow progress. A step forward, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction. We got to keep going. We got to keep moving, even when it doesn't seem like much is happening. You take, for example, if you plant a seed into the ground and you wait, not much happens. You've got to consistently water it. The sun has to be down on it. And when it doesn't seem like anything's taking place, there's actually invisible growth, as we know, underneath the ground. The roots are beginning to take root. And all of a sudden, even though it doesn't seem like there's progress, a sprout will come up. And eventually, that small seed, maybe it's an acorn, grows into, over time, this massive, major, strong oak tree. But it doesn't start there. It starts with a small beginning. Think about it. If let's say the farmer or the gardener was looking at it kind of like I did, which was not the right way to do, looking at putting the seed in the ground, and they're going, oh, this is worthless. This is insignificant. Not much is taking place. No, we know they wouldn't do that. That would be ludicrous, because we know that things are actually happening. And listen, we've got to apply that to our lives. Even when it feels like, even when it doesn't look like you're gaining progress, you really are. Don't despise small beginnings. Now, that brings me to the second idea I want to talk about, and that is, how do we measure progress in the right way? How do we get to the place where we're not becoming discouraged or disappointed by slow progress, where it looks like things aren't really happening that well? Let me break this down for you. I ran across this book titled The Gap and the Gain. Now, the concept was popularized by an entrepreneur coach by the name of Dan Sullivan, written in the book The Gap and the Gain by Ben Hardy. And after reading this book, I got to say, I wish I would have heard about this concept about 30 years ago. That's how powerful it was. That's how impactful this gap and gain principle has become in my life. And if I would have known this 30 years ago, it would have saved me so much time in frustration, in discouragement, in beating myself up, in wishing that I was further along than I really was. I spent so much time despising small beginnings and thinking, man, I'm just not where I need to be. But here's the cool thing about the gap and the gain. Let me break it down in my own words, just kind of using my own story. And it basically is this: when you look at where you think you should be, in other words, after 20 years of investing my life and trying to reach thousands of people and not really getting to that place, that's not my reality. If I take that and I go, okay, here I am where I'm at right now, and my ideal is reaching 1,000, and I measure my success by the ideal of where I think I should be at this moment, that's living in the gap, which causes us to be frustrated, causes us to be discouraged, disappointed, not very happy with our results because we're measuring our success by where we think we should be compared to where we are right now. And he calls it the gap. That's living in the gap, not the place that you want to live by any means. Then he goes on to describe that living in the gain is doing something that seems somewhat pointless, seems somewhat not very impactful, if you will, but really has a profound way of changing your perspective and how you're living your life. And it goes a little like this. Where I'm at now, I want to measure my success not by the ideal of where I think I should be, but where I'm at now, measured by where I used to be. In other words, I'm looking at where I am, where I've started, and I'm saying, I've gained this much progress. Now, it's not that I'm doing away with where I would love to be. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is this. When you live in the gain of this is where I started, and I went through this and I've went through that, and I've grown here and I've gained great progress here or slow progress here. I'm focused on my progress. I'm focused on my growth. I'm focused on who I've become. And when I look at that, I can see how much ground that I've gained rather than how much ground I so have to go because I haven't arrived there yet. But by doing that, by living in the gain, what a change of perspective. What a change of rather than living in frustration and all those things that come from measuring your life in the gap, what a difference it makes to measure yourself when you look at the progress that you've made. And this should continue to fuel us to, yes, reach for that ideal place, to hopefully one day get to that place where we hope to be. But we're not so focused on that we have forgotten how far we've come up to this point. And it changed my life. It changed the way I see things now. And I just got to say, it truly can transform your life. It truly can get you out of the place of feeling like you're always stuck, like things are always going wrong, or whatever you're feeling like when you're trying to reach to that point and you're not getting there that fast. Now, I wish that we could live there, but unfortunately, we don't always live in the gain. Sometimes we still fall into the gap. But let me just say, if you can look at it that way, you won't give up. You'll keep going because you've gained progress. And the cool thing is once you know that when you fall into the gap, you're actually living in the gap, the difference is how fast you can get back out of the gap, start living in the gain so that you're in the right frame of mind. And so measure your progress not on how far you still have to go, but rather on how far that you've actually came. What a difference it'll make in your life. I promise it will help relieve pressure, help relieve frustration, help relieve disappointments and discouragements because you're now focused on the right measurement for progress. So measure yourself by the gain and not the gap. Now, the third thing I'd like to talk about is simply this. We've got to learn to embrace our story. Comparing your story to other people's stories, man, it is a momentum killer. You've probably fallen into it. I have fallen into it, that comparison trap where we have a tendency to look at someone else that is in chapter 20 of their story, and maybe we're only in chapter 2 of our story, and compare the results they're getting versus the results that we're getting, or look at them and how far they've come and how successful they've become, and we're back here just on chapter 2, not gaining much results, not gaining much of anything, so it seems. And if we're not careful, that kills momentum. We start wondering, why is this taking us so long? Why haven't I got quicker results? Why am I not where that person is? Especially in today's social media world where all we see is other people's highlights. All we see is all the good and the places people are going and the great things that are happening in their life. And we have a tendency to go, man, they really got a great story. My story's not that great. Can I just encourage you? Stop trying to live someone else's story. You can't. Rather, embrace your story. Embrace the life that you're living, because it's the only story you get to live. It's the only one you get to write. You don't get to write anybody else's story. You don't get to live in anyone else's shoes but the ones that you put on each morning. So embrace your story. Build your story and honor your pace. It may not be as fast as the other person. Here's the cool thing. You're not in a race with anybody else. You don't have to compare. You don't have to measure up to anyone else's success other than your own. So build your story. Honor your pace. And then you will truly begin to write your story. And last but not least, let's talk a little bit about the power of grit. Now, if you're asking what grit is, let me give you a definition that I think really spells it out, really makes it plain. It comes from the book Grit by Angela Duckworth. And I think she gives a great definition of what grit truly is. It helps us understand, man, how important grit is to achieving your dreams, your goals, and becoming who you are meant to be. She says this in her book: grit is passion and perseverance for long-term goals. One way she describes to think about grit is to consider what grit is not. Grit isn't talent. Grit isn't luck. Grit isn't how intensely for the moment you want something. Instead, grit is about having what some researchers call an ultimate concern, a goal you care so much about that it organizes and gives meaning to almost everything that you do. And grit is holding steadfast to that goal. Even when you fall down, even when you screw up, even when progress toward that goal is halting or slow. Grit keeps you when all else fails. Grit is the one thing that will keep you pursuing the ultimate concern, the ultimate goal. I was recently on a camping trip with some men in the desert, and one night we're all sitting around the campfire, and this gentleman begins to tell this story about two men. One's name was Pombo, the other name was John, I believe. And John comes to ask a question of his mentor, his spiritual father, Pombo, and he asks this question: how do I increase my closeness to God? And Pombo gave him a dead stick. And then he told John to water this dead stick every day. So John went back and planted this dead stick in the ground of the desert where he lived. And every day, John would water this dead stick. Now, what's amazing about this is the nearest water source was about 12 miles away. So, in order for John to water this dead stick every day, John would have to travel 12 miles one way to get his water. Then he would have to travel 12 miles back so that he can water this dead stick. Talk about grit. John had this ultimate concern, this goal that was consuming everything that he did, this goal of getting closer to God, that he was willing to walk 24 miles, not just for a week, not just for a month, not just even for 1 year, but for 3 years. John faithfully walked back and forth every day to water this dead stick. And finally, after 3 years, a miracle took place, the story goes, that this dead stick began to sprout leaves and eventually produced fruit. Why? Grit is what it took. Now, I'm sure John didn't understand when he asked the question of how he got close to God, and the master gives him a stick. I'm sure he probably wondered, why am I doing this? What is the meaning of this? I'm sure there was moments of discouragement that whispered, just give up, just forget this dead stick. Nothing's really happening. There's not much progress taking place. Screams of disappointment probably came when he woke up day after day, seeing no results for his effort. But faithfully, with perseverance, the courage to go day after day, he was obedient, and finally, the results showed up. When I heard this story, it fueled me to the core. I began to reflect that even though I have not seen, after 20 years, the results that I would have liked to have seen, I've got to keep going. I must continue to be faithful to the cause. I've got to push past the disappointments, the feelings of discouragement, and keep watering my dead stick, if you will. Keep pursuing the goal. For the ultimate concern of reaching people for me is something that I've been called to. And even though I have despised small beginnings, lived in the gap a lot, fallen into the trap of comparison, I've got the power of grit. I've got to keep going after this dream of reaching 1,000. Listen, I have learned to take a beating, get knocked down, get back up, and keep going. I've been betrayed by close friends. I've been let down by more people than I can count. But one thing has always remained in my life, and that's grit. Even though I have had thoughts of giving up, even though I've talked about giving up, even though I've even made plans to give up, it's that ultimate concern. It's that goal that I care so much about that has given meaning to almost everything that I do. That's what keeps me going. It's grit. So if you've got a dream, something that you are pursuing, here's what I recommend you do. Number one, celebrate small beginnings. No matter how small or how tiny it seems, rejoice and take pleasure in the beginning of the work. Number two, live more in the gain than the gap. Keep your ideal in front of you, yes, but measure where you are by where you have started so that your focus stays on your progress. Number three is this: embrace your story and how it is unfolding. It is the only story that you get to live, so embrace it. And last, live with grit. Know that what you're pursuing is so important that it is worth continuing on in the fight. Well, that's it for this episode of The Unshakable Edge. If this resonated with you, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, stay focused, stay disciplined, and keep